Good evening, everyone. Today I'm talking about Gal Guardians 2, developed by the famous, or perhaps infamous depending on your opinion, Inti Creates, the developer of Mega Man Zero way back in the day, who has now become a very prolific indie creator. Almost to the point of absurdity, they often have several game releases every year, and a number of them tend to feel kind of half-baked, like the Johanna the Parhelion licensed game that seemed like a bare-bones effort to copy Ender Lilies. Now, the first Gal Guardians was this basic Castlevania-esque platformer that wasn't a proper Metroidvania, but it did have the sort of enemy design and systems of a Metroidvania just without the ability gating. And most importantly, it's not based on any previous property and you can't prove it. It came to us from outer space, in a spaceship piloted by Hatsune Miku, so you don't need to look into it. This sequel, however, is an actual Metroidvania, though it gets there in a strange way. Rather than the conventional route of finding a new ability after defeating a boss, you instead gain new abilities from leveling up. But before I get into that, I should probably explain the story, which takes place in the underworld with a couple of demon maids that work for their sire, Maxim Onslaught. After this Dark Lord is defeated by another Dark Lord and a traitor, he gets reduced to this cute little skull, and you now have to go around the kingdom finding his bones to put him back together. And it's through that we have the leveling system. Anytime you collect bones and then find a teleporter back to the throne room, you can spend them to level up, which will either increase your hit points or your demonic power, the magic system that allows for sub-weapon usage. But occasionally you will hit certain milestones that will get you those Metroidvania abilities. This of course includes your standard double jump and air dash, as well as special abilities from Maxim himself, such as a healing spell that will give you 50% of your hit points back. And it only has a cooldown of around a minute, so it's very useful. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this upgrading system is very strange, and I kind of see why the developers went this way. It's a way of making sure you're properly at level with the enemies you're gonna be facing in the next biome, but it still feels like it kind of takes some of the non-linearity out of the Metroidvania experience. Though I'll at least say that you don't need to grind in this game. I didn't farm any enemies, I just defeated the enemies that I came across as I was exploring, and I managed to hang with the general level curve of the game. Now, granted, I'm playing on the normal difficulty, so I can't say for sure whether this would apply to the hardcore mode as well. Like in the first Gal Guardians game, and in case you didn't play that one, you play as two protagonists that you can switch between, one of whom has the conventional whip, and the other of whom has a ranged machine gun. The melee character is much stronger and can chain combos together, while the ranged fighter is much weaker but can pellet enemies for a pretty long time before they have to reload. And they do have a shotgun blast, but it's kind of unwieldy and I don't prefer using it. In all honesty, I don't really use the ranged character that much at all in the game except for bosses, as there are certain attack patterns where your only way of making contact is through ranged attacks. There are also sub-weapons in the Castlevania tradition that cost various amounts of demonic points. You've got your daggers and your heavy blades, as well as enemy summons and explosives. There are also consumable items like healing items, and even a tool or two like a lantern to help you find your way around in dark areas. There's a young adventurer you can find who will give you rewards for completing the map, which is a nice little perk, though they are a little out of the way and don't live at the castle, and a weird little monster that will expand your inventory space if you give them money. Lastly, you'll get badges, which are passive upgrades you can equip on Maxim at any time. These can range from trade-offs, like increasing your attack power but decreasing your HP, to just flat-out attack and defense upgrades. Going back to the level up system, the one thing that I'll say is really neat about it is the bone system. And really, how many games can you say have a bone system? These bones can often be found in bunches inside of treasure chests, or after defeating a boss. So it kind of gives the game a bit of a collectathon feel, and as a 3D platformer fan, I'm obviously all about collectathons. There's just one small but kind of significant caveat. Bones can also randomly drop from enemies. And this I really don't love. It's much more fun to just find these things in the world from exploration or completing a tough platforming challenge. Now, each area does have a maximum amount of bones, but it's a little demoralizing that you might find all the bones that are just out there in a region, but then still have to farm enemies to get the rest. So I don't know if this is really the ideal game for 100% completionists. You'll also find stray souls in the overworld, which you can bring back to the castle and put them back in the bones that they belong to. This will unlock special vendors in the castle town, like a blacksmith or a treasure hoard where you can store surplus items, and building up a town full of vendors is something I really liked about the Suikoden games, so again, that's another point in the game's favor. Even if the game's art design isn't the most inspired, they are bringing together different elements from games you wouldn't expect, and so I kinda like that approach in theory, and even sometimes in execution. In order to get to the castle town or the throne room, you need to find save points in the world, and your most recent save point will have a crest attached to it, which will serve as an anchor point for you to return to at any time once you're done at the castle. But if you prefer more of a fast travel system, you can also find various Karens in the world, not that Karen, the underworld Karen, okay? Don't make me break out the Forgotten City memes. Though like most Metroidvania teleporter systems, you do have to find each one before you can use them, and they cost money as well. But you'll get a lot of money over the course of the game, and you'll find fountains that can give you passive income every time you check in on them, so money isn't really going to be much of a problem. Some treasure chests feel a bit arbitrary, like too many of them have sub-weapons in them, which reminds me of why I didn't like the treasure chests in Breath of the Wild. In my mind, a treasure chest in a Metroidvania should either contain something important or currency and nothing else. And sometimes you can find Maxim's bones in a chest, but more often than not, you'll get something relatively worthless. Lastly, a couple of the abilities that you get could be explained a tiny bit better, like the Maxim-powered Mega Dash you eventually receive allows you to run across water, but the tip screen doesn't tell you that, and progression might be a little confusing at times if you weren't thinking laterally enough. For example, Masha has the ability to collect elemental seeds to throw with a charge attack, but it's easy to forget she has them. At a certain point in the game, there's a path blocked off by lava, and you need to use an ice seed to get past it, which is on me for forgetting, but I did have to leave the area to farm ice seeds, so whenever farming becomes required, it's a little annoying. At least there's a gardener you can rescue in the castle who can store seeds for you if you bring her 3. Now you may be wondering, just how horny is this game, considering its lineage? Well, it sure likes to remind you of that lineage about once every 5 to 6 hours. There are 2 different bosses that are just big titty ladies, and one of them breaks out the, hey guys, it's totally ironic, tentacle fetish, like we're in the adult video section of the Blockbuster Video in the 1990s, looking at some renamed softcore anime imported by Media Blasters. There's also a hot spring scene, so I guess we're just going all the way down the 1990s anime bingo card, and various bits of innuendo here and there in the dialogue. If you're a millennial and watching anime makes you worried your mom will walk in on you even though you've lived on your own for the last 20 years, then you probably aren't going to want to play this game. Being asexual, I can only cringe at it, especially in an era where anime, for the most part, has really grown out of those stereotypes. Look, you want to goon to it, be my guest, but you may as well play one of the hundreds of hentai jigsaw puzzle games on the eShop if that's all you care about. The map is okay. It's one of those grid-style maps where every square is the same size, but they do at least mark where treasure chests have been opened, as well as save points and Karen transport areas, so it could be a lot worse. As for the bosses, I have somewhat mixed feelings. Some of them do have a high number of attack patterns, which I personally think is pretty cool if you're not going to have phases, but depending on how you're leveled, these can be absolute damage sponges, and these fights could take way longer than you would expect. The game supposedly has online play, but when you try to go to the guy who offers it, it's not currently available on the Switch. All of the options are just grayed out. When it comes to the biomes, you've got your forest area, you've got your caverns, you've got your ice area. I did like these purple sand deserts, and then when you go underground, there's this very algae and moss infested underground, so that's pretty cool. Visually, it's sort of what you'd expect out of Inti Creates, colorful Game Boy Advance aesthetic with some okay pixel animation. While I'm generally a sucker for this look, I do think the art direction itself is somewhat generic, and I wouldn't be surprised if the game reused assets from the previous entry. I already saw reused enemies. Then again, all of the Game Boy Advance Castlevanias kind of did the same thing, so I don't know. What I can't forgive though is the lack of music tracks. None of them are that memorable, but they at least stay far back enough in the mix that the repetition doesn't get grating. But it's still disappointing that there are only like 5 or 6 tracks total in a 10 to 12 hour game. The final area is the only biome to have its own unique music. I'm sure the studio was operating off of the thinnest budgets possible to stay afloat, but this is going to be one you pump in your own music collection for. Despite the game's back half horniness, I still mostly like Gal Guardian's Servants of the Dark. I think of the various non-Blaster Master projects from Inti Creates, this feels like the fullest game experience, and I like how they've integrated collectathon and town rebuilding elements to the gameplay, but they've also made decisions that cheapen the Metroidvania experience a bit, and there are times where progression is simultaneously too linear and too vague. I consider it a solid meat and potatoes entry into a relatively crowded genre, one that Castlevania fans should enjoy and Hollow Knight fans should definitely avoid. Perhaps if they spin this series off enough, they can eventually dilute the weird shit and make for a game that I can actually recommend to normal people. Folks, this is the end of the video, and I'm gonna beg on my hands and knees for a like, a comment, a subscribe, and a bell. I'm in the middle of a major review gauntlet, and it'll be that way up until the middle of June, so there will continue to be 2 videos a week until that break. I'll be talking about Stygian Outer Gods later this week, and then Squirreled Away, The Abandoned Planet, Locomoto, and Crashlands 2, so if you're interested in any of those, please follow the channel. Special thanks to my indie darlings, Rob Scott, Tyler McBride, Thumpus, Nick Shalark, Tony Domenico, and Game Trekker. Thanks for watching, and until next time, you'll find me in another castle.